Have you ever seen a child stand at the edge of the world they once called home, only to be told they don't belong anymore? This is the story of a little girl cast aside on the very day her father celebrated a new beginning, and the unexpected miracle that arrived in the form of a police officer and his loyal German shepherd. What happens next will remind you that sometimes family isn't given by blood, it's chosen by love. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below, I'd love to know. And if you believe every child deserves protection and a safe home, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this powerful journey. Thank you for being here, and may your day be filled with kindness and light. The winter sun hung low over the small mountain town of Pinebrook. Its light filtered through gray clouds heavy with the promise of snow. The air was sharp with cold, every breath turning into white fog that drifted briefly before vanishing into the crisp air. Main Street lay quiet under strings of holiday lights, still hanging from lampposts. Though just beyond town, the bells of St. Matthew's Church tolled in celebration. It was the sound of a wedding, the kind that drew out every socialite, businessman, and power broker within 50 miles. Outside the grand old stone church, laughter carried over the brick courtyard, champagne glasses clinked, and a string quartet played beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. The guests spoke in warm tones about Harold Whitfield, the 47-year-old businessman whose name carried weight in the county. Harold was a broad-shouldered man with a firm jaw, neatly styled dark hair that was turning silver, and eyes that seemed warm to his investors but cold to his own child. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never been denied comfort, and beneath his polished smile hid a streak of selfishness sharpened by years of unchecked authority. At his side, radiant in a gown of white silk and lace, was Vanessa. She was 38, tall and statuesque, with glossy raven-black hair pinned high, her lips painted red in a smile so dazzling it seemed crafted more for the photographers than for Harold. Her beauty was striking, but the cold gleam in her eyes betrayed a calculating nature. Life had made her shrewd. Once a failed actress turned socialite, she had clawed her way into wealthy circles, and marriage to Harold was her golden ticket to permanence. Beside her pranced Chloe, her daughter from a previous marriage, a 12-year-old girl with long, straight blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and a smirk that rarely left her lips. Chloe adored mirroring her mother's cruelty, mocking those weaker than herself, a trait sharpened by being spoiled and encouraged to believe she was superior to everyone else. While the music swelled and the bride and groom basked in applause just outside the ornate iron gate of the church, another image unfolded, stark and devastating in its contrast. A small girl sat on the icy stone steps, her back hunched against the cold. Her name was Lily Parker, 6 years old, with tangled golden hair that fell across her pale cheeks. She clutched a battered brown suitcase almost as large as herself. Her dress was faded, threadbare at the seams, a garment that had once been pink but had dulled to a lifeless gray. Her small boots were scuffed, one sole flapping loose. Lily's face carried the raw marks of tears, her eyes swollen, her lips chapped from the cold, her entire body trembling as she tried to gather scattered clothing from the suitcase that had burst open on the ground. A tiny stuffed bear, missing one ear and stained with age, slipped from her grip and she scrambled, desperately to clutch it back to her chest. Lily had been a bright child once, but since the death of her mother Grace a month earlier, her world had unraveled. Grace had been a gentlewoman with soft features, known in Pinebrook for her kindness and her habit of humming hymns as she carried groceries home for elderly neighbors. Leukemia had taken her swiftly, leaving Lily adrift in grief before she had even learned what mourning meant. Instead of finding comfort in her father's arms, she was met with Harold's distance and Vanessa's disdain. In the weeks following Grace's funeral, Vanessa and Chloe had moved into the Whitfield mansion, turning Lily's life into a daily crucible of cruelty. At dinner, Vanessa's sharp tongue would slice through the silence, mocking Lily's manners, her clothing, her very presence. Chloe laughed each time her mother found a new way to make the little girl cry. By the time Harold's wedding day arrived, Lily was no longer seen as a daughter, but as a burden to discard. And discard her they did, setting her suitcase outside the church gates as if she were nothing more than baggage. Inside, Vanessa basked in her triumph, while outside Lily clung to what little she had left. A gust of icy wind swept through the courtyard, scattering Lily's threadbare clothes across the steps again. Her small fingers worked quickly, fumbling as she tried to collect them, but her hands shook too much from the cold. When she looked up, her blue eyes wide with fear, she saw Vanessa approaching, gown trailing, lips curled into a cruel sneer. With deliberate force, Vanessa kicked the suitcase, scattering Lily's things again. Chloe followed, her silk dress pristine, her laughter high-pitched and merciless. "Only princesses belong here," Chloe said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "No beggars allowed." A few guests overheard and chuckled, unwilling to stand against the powerful Whitfields. Lily's cheeks burned as tears streaked down her face. She whispered to herself, voice cracking, "Mom, why did you leave me? Dad doesn't want me either." From the church doors, Harold appeared, one hand clasping Vanessa's arm, the other holding a glass of champagne. His smile was wide for the crowd, but when his eyes fell upon Lily, there was no warmth in them, only irritation. She looked at him, her lips trembling, silently pleading for a single embrace. Instead, Harold shook his head, tightened his grip on Vanessa's hand, and muttered to a guest nearby, "That girl has nothing to do with me." The words pierced Lily like a blade. Her body slumped forward, her sobs quiet but uncontainable. Just then, another sound reached the gates, not music, not laughter, but the hum of a patrol car pulling up on the road beside the church. From it stepped Ethan Cole, the town's police chief. Ethan was 40 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed carved from both discipline and compassion. His dark brown hair was flecked with gray at the temples, his storm-gray eyes steady, carrying the weight of a man who had seen both the best and worst of people. His uniform was crisp, though his boots carried scuffs that showed he still walked the streets rather than sitting behind a desk. Ethan's reputation in Pine Brook was one of integrity and quiet strength. He had never allowed wealth or politics to bend his sense of duty. Yet behind the firmness of his jaw lay scars from his own childhood. His father, a steel worker, had died in an accident when Ethan was 11, and his mother, too broken to cope, had sent him to live with distant relatives. He knew the sting of abandonment and had sworn never to let a child suffer the same if he could help it. Walking at his side was Ranger, his loyal German shepherd. Ranger was 7 years old, large and muscular, with a thick black and silver coat that shimmered even under the gray sky. His amber eyes were alert but gentle, the kind that carried an uncanny intelligence. He had once been part of the K-9 unit, trained to track, protect, and comfort. But after Ethan's promotion to chief, Ranger had become both partner and family. Together, they were a familiar sight in Pine Brook, the symbol of a guardian duo who walked the line between justice and compassion. Ethan had not come for the wedding. He disliked such displays of vanity, but rather to answer a minor traffic disturbance reported near the church. Yet, as he approached the gates, his gaze fell upon Lily, huddled on the steps with her suitcase spilling its contents, Vanessa looming over her, Harold turning his back. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his jaw tightening, and for a moment the cold air seemed even sharper. Ranger lowered his head, ears flicking, a low whine escaping his throat, as if he too sensed the depth of the child's despair. Ethan's eyes lingered on the girl, on the trembling hands, the swollen eyes, the way she clutched the ragged bear as though it were her last tether to life. It was like staring into a mirror of his own past. And in that instant, something inside him shifted. He did not yet know how, but he knew this child's life was about to become his responsibility. The bells of St. Matthew's still rang faintly in the distance when Ethan Cole stood rooted before the church gates. The laughter of the wedding crowd spilled into the night air, but his attention stayed locked on the little girl at his feet. Lily's tiny body was bent low, her arms curled tightly around the battered suitcase, as though it were the last barrier against the world's cruelty. Ethan's breath escaped in a visible cloud, slow and measured, though his chest tightened at the sight. Beside him, Ranger pressed his black and silver furred body forward, amber eyes narrowing on Vanessa's towering figure. The dog's tail was stiff, his muscles taut, as if waiting for a single word to defend the child. Vanessa noticed Ethan's approach and immediately drew herself to her full height. Even in the soft glow of the lanterns strung outside the church, her beauty was cold and sharp, her raven hair gleaming like polished stone, her painted lips curling in disdain. She gripped Harold's arm, her nails digging into the sleeve of his fine wool suit. "Officer," she said, her voice honeyed yet threaded with venom, "this is a private family matter. You do well not to interfere." Harold, taller than Ethan but less imposing, forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. His dark hair, sprinkled with silver, was combed back neatly, though his brow glistened with sweat. He shifted uncomfortably as the music swelled behind him, trying to maintain his image of celebration while dismissing the crying child at his feet. "It's nothing, Chief Cole. Just a misunderstanding. My daughter, well, she's upset. Weddings can be overwhelming for children." He avoided Ethan's gaze, staring instead at the courtyard where guests clinked glasses. Lily raised her head at the word daughter, her blue eyes red and swollen. She clutched the suitcase tighter, her voice no more than a tremor. "He doesn't want me. He said I have nothing to do with him." The words froze Ethan where he stood. He glanced at Harold sharply, the truth unmasked in the man's silence. Ethan had seen hardened criminals try to lie their way out of confessions, but rarely had he seen a father shrink from his own child's plea. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Chloe skipped forward, her silk dress shimmering under the lanterns. The 12-year-old tilted her chin, her pale eyes filled with gleeful cruelty. "She's lying," Chloe sang. "She's nothing but a beggar. Daddy said so." Then she laughed, high and shrill, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Ranger growled low, a rumble deep in his chest, forcing Chloe to retreat behind Vanessa with a squeak. Vanessa yanked her daughter closer, glaring at Ethan as though daring him to challenge her authority. "You'll excuse us, Chief," she said icily. "We're hosting an event of great importance. If you must waste time, waste it elsewhere." Ethan's storm-gray eyes shifted back to Lily. He crouched low, bringing himself level with her tiny frame. His voice was steady, quiet, yet firm. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she whispered, hugging the teddy bear now peeking from the half-open suitcase. Ethan nodded once, the name searing itself into his memory. "You don't have to sit out here alone, Lily." He extended a hand, palm open, unthreatening. Ranger leaned forward too, tail wagging once, his head tilted as though in gentle invitation. Lily's lip trembled. She looked past Ethan toward Harold, desperate for even a flicker of recognition. But Harold turned his face away, sipping his champagne, as if Lily were an inconvenience rather than flesh of his flesh. That rejection cut her deeper than any harsh word. She pressed her cheek into the stuffed bear and whispered, "He doesn't care." A silence stretched between them. Ethan kept his hand extended, not pressing, simply waiting. In his mind, memories stirred. Himself at 11 years old, standing in the cold after his father's funeral. His mother had walked away with another man, her face hidden behind a veil, leaving him with distant relatives who barely knew his name. The boy he had been had stared after her carriage until it disappeared, waiting for her to look back. She never had. That image had haunted him for decades. Now, staring at Lily, it felt as though time had folded back, presenting him with a chance to make right what had once broken him. A voice from behind interrupted. "Chief Cole?" Ethan straightened slightly, turning to see Deputy Sarah Hughes approaching. Sarah was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with sandy hair tied neatly under her cap. Her uniform was tidy, but her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Sarah was known in town as meticulous, almost stern, yet fair. Years earlier, she had lost her younger brother in a drunk driving accident, and since then she carried herself with a fierce protectiveness toward children. She eyed the scene, Lily huddled with her suitcase, Vanessa sneering, Harold pretending not to notice, and her jaw tightened. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. "No problem. This child is emotional." Sarah's eyes softened as they fell on Lily. "Emotional?" she repeated quietly, then looked back at Ethan, her expression making clear she did not believe a word. Ethan rose slowly. "I'll handle it," he said. Then he looked down again at Lily. "I know what it feels like to be left in the cold, but you don't have to stay here tonight, not with me and Ranger standing by." Ranger padded closer, sitting firmly at Lily's side. The German shepherd lowered his head so she could see his gentle amber eyes. Tentatively, Lily stretched a trembling hand to touch the fur along his neck. Ranger stayed perfectly still, his warmth radiating against the child's freezing fingers. For the first time that evening, a tiny sigh of relief slipped from her lips. Vanessa stepped forward, her face tight with anger. "Chief, you have no jurisdiction to take her anywhere. She belongs to her father." Ethan turned his gaze to Harold. "That true?" he asked quietly. Harold swallowed hard, his lips parting, but no words coming. He looked at Vanessa, at Chloe, then at the crowd waiting inside. Finally, he muttered, "Do as you like. She's not my problem." The words echoed like gunfire in the cold air. Lily's small shoulders sagged, the fragile thread of hope inside her snapping. Ethan felt fury rise in his chest, but he pushed it down, replaced by resolve. He leaned again toward Lily. "Come with me, Lily, just for tonight. You'll be safe. That's a promise." Lily clutched her bear tighter, her wide eyes filled with doubt. But when Ranger nudged her hand gently, she rose shakily to her feet, suitcase dragging behind her. She slipped her small fingers into Ethan's hand, the touch tentative but desperate. Ethan gave Vanessa one last glance, his eyes hard as stone. "This isn't over." Then he guided Lily toward the patrol car, Ranger trotting close by, his tail brushing against the girl's knees as though to shield her. Sarah followed a step behind, her voice low. "I'll file the report, Chief, and I'll back you if they come after you." "Thank you, Deputy," Ethan said. Together, they moved into the snowy night, leaving behind the glow of the wedding and the hollow laughter of those who had chosen cruelty over compassion. Ethan didn't yet know what battles awaited him, but one thing was certain. The little girl with the tear-streaked cheeks and the ragged suitcase was no longer alone. The patrol car's tires crunched over the frozen road as it climbed the incline leading to Ethan Cole's home. The town of Pinebrook grew smaller in the distance, the glittering church lights vanishing into the dark behind them. A hush settled inside the car. Lily sat curled in the back seat, clutching her battered suitcase and her one-eared teddy bear. She pressed her forehead against the cold window, eyes wide as if bracing herself for the unknown. Ranger, sitting upright beside her, filled the small space with warmth. The German shepherd's thick black and silver coat brushed against her shoulder, and every so often he turned his head to nuzzle her hand, coaxing her fingers to release their death grip on the bear. Ethan drove in silence for a while, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the snowy road. His house stood at the top of Pinebrook Hill, a modest two-story cabin of cedar and stone. Unlike Harold's mansion, the Cole residence was no palace but a place shaped by years of steady hands and honest living. When he had bought it a decade earlier, after being promoted from detective to chief of police, he'd chosen it for its quietness, its distance from the politics of the town center. To him, it had always been a refuge. He hoped silently it might become the same for Lily. As the car pulled into the gravel driveway, the porch light flicked on, illuminating the figure of an older woman who stood waiting by the door. She was Eleanor Nora Jenkins, Ethan's neighbor of 15 years, and something of a surrogate aunt in his life. In her late 50s, with a round figure and hair streaked in white tied loosely at the nape of her neck, she carried herself with brisk kindness. Widowed young, Nora had never remarried, pouring her warmth into tending her garden, baking bread, and watching out for the neighborhood children as if they were her own. Her eyes, hazel and soft, often lit with laughter, though tonight they sharpened with worry as she spotted Lily stepping hesitantly from the car. "Evening, Ethan," she called, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. Her voice had a lilting quality, touched with the rhythm of old hymns she still sang at church. Her gaze fell on Lily, who stood half hidden behind Ranger. "And who is this little one?" Ethan shut the car door and placed a steady hand on Lily's shoulder. "This is Lily. She's staying here for the night." His tone carried quiet finality. Nora stepped closer, her eyes softening immediately at the sight of the child's tear-streaked face and trembling hands. "Oh, poor dear," she murmured. "Well, let's get you warm. No child should be left out in the cold." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine wood and fresh coffee. The living room was simple but welcoming. A stone fireplace crackling with warmth, bookshelves lined with worn novels and case files, and a sturdy oak table scarred with years of use. A few photographs hung on the wall. Ethan, in uniform with Ranger by his side, and another of Ethan shaking hands with townsfolk after a charity event. Yet there were no family portraits, no traces of a wife or children. The absence seemed to press against the room, though Ethan himself rarely noticed anymore. Ranger padded across the wooden floor, circling once before lying by the fire, his amber eyes watching Lily closely. The child stood at the threshold, her suitcase clutched to her chest as though she expected someone to snatch it away. Ethan knelt before her, his voice calm. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you. You can put your things down." Lily hesitated, then slowly lowered the suitcase onto the rug. She clung to the teddy bear, knuckles white around its worn fabric. Nora bustled into the kitchen, her movements brisk. "I'll fix her some hot chocolate. Sweet things mend the spirit." Left alone with Ethan, Lily shifted uneasily. Am I staying here forever?" Her voice was so small he barely heard it. "Just tonight," Ethan said gently. "We'll talk more tomorrow." He wanted to promise more, but he knew how fragile promises could become in a courtroom. Still, his eyes carried a weight that Lily recognized. He meant to protect her. Nora returned with a steaming mug, setting it carefully in front of Lily. "Careful now, it's hot, but it'll chase the cold right out." Lily wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. She sipped tentatively, her eyes flicking from Nora to Ethan to Ranger, as though still uncertain this kindness was real. As the flames danced in the fireplace, Ethan sat across from her. "Tell me about your teddy bear," he said, searching for a way to reach her. Lily glanced down at the one-eared bear. "Mom gave him to me on my birthday. His name is Buttons." Her voice cracked on the word Mom. She pressed the bear tighter against her chest. "She said he'd always watch over me, even if she couldn't." Ethan's chest tightened. Grace Parker had been well known in town, a woman who always brought meals to the firehouse during long shifts and never left a church service without greeting every neighbor. Her death had been spoken of with hushed sorrow. Now Ethan saw her legacy distilled into the frightened child before him. The clock ticked softly as the night wore on. Lily grew drowsy, her eyelids heavy, but her body still stiff with tension. Ethan stood. "Come on, I'll show you to a room." He led her upstairs to a small guest bedroom. The space was plain but warm, with clean sheets and a quilt folded neatly at the end of the bed. A wooden desk stood by the window, the lamp casting a soft yellow glow. Lily set her suitcase on the bed, pulling out a sweater far too large for her small frame. She hugged it, then whispered, "It smells like her." Ethan paused in the doorway, watching the child curl onto the bed, still clinging to Buttons. "Good night, Lily," he said softly. Ranger padded into the room, circling once before settling at the foot of the bed. His presence seemed to ease her trembling. Lily's small hand rested gently on his back as her eyes finally drifted closed. Ethan lingered in the hallway for a long moment. He could hear her soft breathing, the occasional sigh that broke into a quiet whimper. Memories rose unbidden, his own nights as a boy, lying awake in unfamiliar rooms, waiting for a door to open that never did. He clenched his jaw, promising himself that this child would not endure the same fate. Downstairs, Nora waited by the fire, her shawl wrapped tightly. "She's been through too much," she said quietly when Ethan joined her. "You can see it in her eyes, like a bird that's forgotten how to fly." Ethan rubbed a hand across his tired face. "I know." His gaze moved to the flames. "And Harold, he just turned his back." Nora shook her head slowly. "A father who forgets his child has forgotten himself." She gave Ethan a steady look. "You'll have to decide, Ethan. Are you willing to carry her pain until she learns to trust again?" He said nothing at first. Ranger's nails clicked faintly on the floor upstairs, a reminder of loyalty that never wavered. Ethan finally nodded. "I won't let her be cast aside again, not while I'm breathing." Outside, the snow began to fall, dusting the cedar roof of the house on the hill. Inside, for the first time in weeks, Lily slept without the jeers of Vanessa or the smirk of Chloe haunting her dreams. Morning broke over Pinebrook, with a pale winter sun casting long shadows over the snowy rooftops. The town was waking slowly, shop doors creaking open. the aroma of coffee drifting from the small diner on Main Street. At the top of the hill, Ethan Cole stood at his porch with a steaming mug in hand, his storm-gray eyes watching the horizon. Ranger sat beside him, tail brushing the snow-dusted boards, ears pricked at every distant sound. Inside the cabin, Lily remained asleep, her face pressed against the one-eared bear, the tension that had clung to her the night before, softened by exhaustion. Down in town, however, silence had given way to whispers. News traveled quickly in Pine Brook, and by the time the church bells had finished tolling the previous night, word was already spreading. Harold Whitfield had cast his daughter out during his wedding, and the police chief himself had stepped in. In the diner, where townsfolk gathered for breakfast, the talk was sharp and unrelenting. At the counter sat Marjorie Kane, the editor of the Pine Brook Gazette. She was a woman in her late 40s, with auburn hair cut short in a no-nonsense bob, glasses perched permanently on her nose, and an ever-present notebook in her bag. Marjorie had built her reputation on chasing uncomfortable truths. She had once exposed a corrupt land deal that nearly cost the mayor his seat. Known for her sharp wit and unwillingness to bow to local elites, she was respected and feared in equal measure. This morning, her pen scribbled furiously as she listened to whispers of Harold's cruelty. At a corner booth sat Councilman Richard Harlan, a man in his 60s with thinning silver hair and a cane that tapped sharply against the floor when he grew impatient. He was a powerful voice in the town council, always immaculately dressed in wool suits even in the early hours. Richard had built his career on alliances with Pine Brook's wealthiest, Harold Whitfield chief among them. Now his lined face was tense as he listened to the chatter, lips pressed thin. The scandal threatened the very image he and his allies had cultivated. "Marjorie," Richard said finally, his voice gravelly, "don't print this circus before you have the full truth." Marjorie looked up over the rim of her glasses, her eyes cool. "The truth is that a child sat shivering outside a wedding while her father toasted inside, and everyone in this town deserves to know it." Back at the cabin, Ethan prepared breakfast. He scrambled eggs and laid slices of toast on the table, the scent filling the room. When Lily padded into the kitchen, her small feet hesitant on the wooden floor, she paused as though uncertain she belonged there. She wore the oversized sweater from her suitcase, the sleeves swallowing her thin arms. Ranger immediately trotted over, brushing his head against her hand. Lily managed a small smile and whispered, "Good morning, Ranger." Ethan glanced at her, his voice gentle. "Hungry?" She nodded faintly. He slid a plate toward her and watched as she ate cautiously, as if expecting the food to be snatched away. Nora stopped by soon after, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, carrying a basket of warm bread. "Brought these for the little one," she said, setting them down. She smiled at Lily. "Sweetheart, you'll need strength. Eat as much as you like." Lily murmured a thank you, barely audible, but it was more than she had spoken the night before. Ethan noticed the difference, small though it was. The peace of the morning did not last long. By midday, Sarah Hughes arrived at the cabin, boots crunching in the snow. She looked as sharp as ever in her uniform, sandy hair pulled into a tight braid. She removed her gloves, her expression serious. "Chief, you should know, Marjorie's running a story, front page, everyone will see it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Good. Maybe it's time people stop turning their heads." Sarah frowned. "It won't be that simple. Harold still has friends on the council. Councilman Harlan's already circling, saying you overstepped your authority by taking Lily in." Ethan's jaw tightened. Leaving a child in the cold isn't a family matter. It's neglect. Sarah's eyes softened. "I agree, but they'll come after you to protect Harold's reputation." While the adults spoke, Lily sat quietly on the rug with Ranger, her small hands buried in his fur. She traced the faint scar along his flank, the one he had earned in service years before. "Does it hurt him?" she asked softly. "No," Ethan said, glancing down at her. "It just shows he's been through battles, but he's still strong." Lily rested her cheek against the dog's side, whispering, "Then I want to be strong too." That evening, as the snow began to fall heavier, Ethan drove into town with Sarah to attend an emergency council meeting. Lily remained at the cabin under Nora's care, Ranger faithfully stationed at her side. Nora lit candles and told her stories from the old hymnal days, her voice soothing. For the first time, Lily drifted into sleep without clutching her suitcase. At town hall, tension simmered. The council chamber, with its polished oak table and portraits of past mayors, buzzed with sharp voices. Richard Harlan stood at the center, his cane tapping against the floor. "Chief Cole has crossed a line," he declared. "What happened at Harold Whitfield's wedding is private. Dragging it into the public eye risks this town's reputation and its economic stability. Harold's investments keep Pine Brook afloat." Ethan stood firm, his uniform crisp, his voice steady. "Our town's reputation isn't built on Harold's money. It's built on whether we protect our most vulnerable. A child left outside in the cold isn't a private affair. It's everyone's business." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some council members shifted uneasily. Others avoided Ethan's gaze. Only Marjorie, who had slipped into the back with her notebook, wore a small, approving smile. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Cole. You've made an enemy of a powerful man. Don't think your badge makes you untouchable." Ethan didn't flinch. "I don't wear this badge to protect men like Harold. I wear it to protect children like Lily." When the meeting adjourned, Ethan stepped out into the snowy night, Sarah at his side. Marjorie caught up, her pen still scratching notes. "Chief, that was bold, but you've painted a target on your back. You'll need to be ready." Ethan glanced at the falling snow. "I've carried worse. What matters is, Lily won't be invisible anymore." Above them, the church bells tolled again, but this time the sound seemed less triumphant and more like a warning echoing through the crisp night air. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing Pine Brook Hill in a white hush that softened every sound. Ethan Cole rose early, as he always did, brewing coffee and stepping outside to clear the porch steps. Ranger trotted beside him, nose pressed to the frosted air, tail sweeping the snow as he sniffed for any hint of intruders. Inside, the cabin stirred gently. Lily shuffled into the living room, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, the oversized sweater drooping off her narrow shoulders. She clutched buttons, her one-eared bare, against her chest and rubbed her eyes. The fire had burned low, casting an amber glow on her small frame. Ethan noticed the hesitation in her steps. She still moved like someone expecting to be told she didn't belong. "Morning, kiddo," he said, keeping his voice warm but casual. "Hungry?" She gave a shy nod, slipping into a chair at the kitchen table. Nora, who had stopped by early with a tin of biscuits, poured cocoa into a chipped mug and set it before her. "Eat up, darling," Nora said gently, patting Lily's shoulder. The older woman's hazel eyes lingered with quiet worry. She had seen many children in her life, but never one carrying so much silence at so young an age. As Lily nibbled at her biscuit, she looked up at Ethan, studying him as though weighing something. Her voice was a whisper, but every syllable was heavy with longing. "Can I call you Daddy?" The mug in Ethan's hand paused midair. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire. His storm-gray eyes softened, and a memory struck him. Standing in a bare room at 11 years old, wishing someone had answered when he whispered the same word. He lowered the mug slowly. "If that's what you want, Lily," he said quietly. Her lips trembled, and for the first time a small smile broke across her face, faint but real. "Daddy," she repeated, testing the word, as though it were both terrifying and comforting. Ranger shifted closer, laying his great head on her lap, as if sealing the bond with silent approval. Later that day, Ethan found himself sorting through old boxes in the attic. He had been searching for spare blankets when he discovered a cedar chest pushed against the far wall. The chest had once belonged to Grace Parker, Lily's mother. Ethan remembered helping Grace store her belongings there after Harold purchased the Whitfield mansion years earlier. Curious, he pried it open. Inside lay neatly folded letters, photographs, and a small lockbox with Grace's handwriting scrawled across the lid. "For Lily, if I cannot be there." Ethan's hands stilled. He fetched the key tied to the box's handle and opened it carefully. Inside were legal documents, a will, and notarized papers naming Lily as the rightful heir to Grace's modest estate and shares in a small cooperative business Grace had invested in before her illness. The will was explicit. Grace wanted everything to go to Lily, protected until she came of age. Ethan's jaw tightened as he thought of Harold and Vanessa scheming to erase Lily's name. Grace had prepared for this. Her gentle eyes seemed to echo from the faded photograph tucked inside, smiling in a way that steadied Ethan's resolve. When Nora climbed the attic stairs carrying laundry, she found him seated with the papers spread before him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan passed her the documents. Grace thought ahead. She knew Harold might cast Lily aside. This could protect her. Nora pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening. "Then you must fight for her, Ethan. If not you, who else?" That evening, while Lily sat curled up with Ranger on the rug, Ethan joined her. She traced the scar along Ranger's flank again, whispering to the dog as though he alone understood. "You protect me, don't you?" Ranger licked her hand, his amber eyes unwavering. Ethan crouched beside her. "Ranger's always been my partner, loyal through every storm, and now he's yours too." Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes wide. Will you leave me like they did?" The question pierced Ethan. He reached out, placing a steady hand on her small shoulder. "No, Lily, I won't. Not today, not ever, I promise." Meanwhile, beyond the quiet refuge of the hill, tension grew in town. Councilman Richard Harlan met privately with Harold and Vanessa in Harold's office, the firelight gleaming off polished mahogany walls. Vanessa looked immaculate, even in a simple cashmere sweater, her raven hair perfectly arranged, but her sharp eyes betrayed fury. Chloe sprawled on a velvet chair, her smirk returning as she listened. Richard tapped his cane against the floor. "The story in the Gazette has stirred sympathy for the child. People are asking questions. If this continues, Harold, you'll lose more than reputation. You'll lose your investors." Harold's face was ashen, his confidence shaken. "Then what do you suggest?" Richard's expression hardened. "Find a way to undermine Cole, paint him as a man overstepping his role, and find that child's inheritance papers before someone else does." Vanessa's lips curved into a cold smile. "Leave that to me." Back at the cabin, Ethan sat at his desk, the documents from Grace laid neatly before him. The crackling fire threw shadows across the room. His mind ran with thoughts of custody battles, council politics, and Harold's influence. But when he heard a small voice from upstairs whispering, "Daddy," in sleep, his heart steadied. This wasn't about politics. It was about a promise made to a mother gone too soon, to a child clutching a bear with one ear, and to himself as a boy who had once longed for someone to stay. The snow outside fell heavier, blanketing the house in silence. Inside, Lily slept with Ranger at her side, her small face untroubled for the first time in weeks. Ethan sat awake, his hand resting on Grace's will, his eyes set with quiet determination. The fight was coming, and he was ready. The days after Ethan discovered Grace's will felt heavier, as though the snow pressing against Pine Brook Hill carried secrets beneath its weight. At night, when Lily slept curled with Ranger at the foot of her bed, Ethan remained awake, the documents spread across his desk under the amber glow of the lamp. The signatures were clear, the notary stamp precise, proof that Grace had fought to protect her daughter even when illness had stolen her strength. Yet Ethan knew paper alone would not shield Lily from the Whitfields' reach. Down in the heart of town, Harold and Vanessa were already scheming. Their lawyer, Douglas Trent, sat across from them in Harold's study. Douglas was in his mid-50s, a man with a compact frame, thinning hair slicked back with too much oil, and a smile that never reached his eyes. His suits were tailored but worn at the edges, suggesting ambition outpacing success. Douglas had built a career defending Pine Brook's elite, earning a reputation as someone willing to twist the law into knots for the right fee. "The will won't hold if we prove Grace wasn't of sound mind at the time," Douglas said, his voice oily, his fingers tapping the leather case before him. "Leukemia, pain medication, emotional stress, easy grounds to argue incapacity." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her raven hair gleaming in the firelight. "Then do it. I won't have that child crawling back into our lives and dragging down everything I've built." Her lips curved into a cold smile. She was never meant to belong. Harold shifted uncomfortably, his broad shoulders hunched. "Keep it quiet. I can't afford more scandal. The Gazette is already making me look like a monster." Douglas smirked. "Monsters don't matter in court. Evidence does, and money. While plots brewed downtown, Ethan sensed unease around his cabin. Ranger, ever vigilant, began pacing more at night, his ears pricking at sounds in the woods. One evening, as Ethan stacked firewood by the shed, Ranger growled low, his amber eyes fixed on the tree line. Ethan followed his gaze but saw nothing, only shadows shifting beneath the branches. Yet he trusted Ranger's instincts. He tightened his patrols around the property, his hand never far from the holster at his belt. During the day, life inside the cabin carried moments of fragile peace. Lily had begun to speak more, though always softly, her words careful, as if they might shatter. One afternoon, Ethan found her at the kitchen table with Nora, drawing with a stub of pencil on scrap paper. The sketch was crude but heartfelt. A little house with smoke curling from its chimney, a tall figure in uniform, a child holding a teddy bear, and a German shepherd with a bushy tail. Ethan's throat tightened when Lily held it up shyly. "It's us," she whispered. Nora's hazel eyes glistened. "That's a fine family portrait," she said warmly, brushing flour from her hands. The older woman had been baking bread again, filling the house with a scent that made the cold less biting. But peace was fragile. One evening, as snow fell in heavy sheets, Ethan returned from the precinct with Sarah Hughes. Sarah had been a quiet but steady ally since the night of the wedding. Her tall, lean frame carried discipline, her sandy braid neat beneath her cap, though her sharp eyes betrayed concern. She had lost her younger brother years before to a drunk driver who walked free due to a technicality. And since then, she had hated watching the law bent for the powerful. Now she carried a folder of notes. "Chief," she said, setting it on the table, "we've seen men lingering near the cabin. Out-of-towners. Don't look like hunters. Might be connected to Harold. I think they're trying to scare you." Ethan exhaled, his jaw tightening. "I figured as much. Ranger's been restless." He glanced at Lily, who sat cross-legged by the fire, reading one of Nora's old hymnals aloud to the dog. Ranger's ears flicked at every sound outside, even as Lily's soft voice carried through the room. Sarah leaned closer. "You need to be ready. If Harold pushes this into court, it won't just be about Lily's custody. They'll attack your integrity, your past, anything they can. You're not just up against a man. You're up against a machine that doesn't care who gets crushed." Ethan's gray eyes hardened. "Then let them come. I've been through worse storms. And Lily's not alone anymore." That night, when Lily went to bed, Ethan sat awake again at his desk. The fire crackled low. Ranger's shadow stretched long on the wall. Outside, the wind howled. He thought of Grace, of her quiet strength even in her sickness, and of the promise he had made silently at her grave, that Lily would never be invisible again. He ran a hand over the will, then over the badge resting on the desk. Both were weights, both were shields. He knew he would need them both. And yet, as he extinguished the lamp, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the darkness beyond the windows. Ranger growled once, low and steady, as if to confirm it. Ethan moved to the door, hand resting on the handle of his gun, and whispered into the silence, "You'll have to get through me first." The morning of the hearing arrived with a gray sky hanging low over Pine Brook. Snow flurries swirled down the courthouse steps, gathering in shallow drifts along the iron railings. Ethan pulled his patrol jacket tighter around him as he walked hand in hand with Lily, who clutched her worn teddy bear in the other. Ranger padded close at their side, his black and silver coat shimmering with frost, eyes alert to every passerby. The courthouse loomed like a fortress of brick and stone, its tall windows casting no warmth, only the solemn weight of judgment. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and cold marble. People filled the gallery, townsfolk, reporters, and a few strangers with sharp suits and quick pens. Lily's small frame shrank as she walked past them, her blonde hair neatly brushed, but her face pale, lips pressed tight to hide the trembling. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone," he whispered. Ranger's amber eyes met hers, as if echoing the same vow. On the opposite side of the room, Harold Whitfield sat beside his wife Vanessa. Harold's once broad shoulders sagged under his tailored navy suit, his eyes shadowed by restless nights, though his jaw remained set in determination. Vanessa was another matter entirely, her beauty polished to perfection. raven hair coiled into an elegant bun, pearl earrings gleaming. Her cold confidence filled the space like perfume too strong to ignore. She rested a manicured hand on the arm of their attorney, Douglas Trent, who sat between them, flipping through thick folders of documents with the calm of a man who believed in the power of paperwork over truth. The presiding judge entered then, a woman in her early 60s named Margaret Hanley. Judge Hanley carried herself with the quiet authority of decades spent sifting right from wrong. Her silver hair was cut short, her dark robe draped neatly, and her gaze sharp behind rectangular glasses. Once known as a fierce advocate for children in foster care before her judgeship, she had developed a reputation for a stern demeanor balanced by compassion when justice demanded it. She took her seat, her gavel striking once against the block, silencing the murmur in the room. "Case of Whitfield versus Hale," she announced. "Custody hearing regarding minor child Lily Whitfield." Ethan sat straighter, his storm gray eyes fixed ahead. Lily shifted closer to him, Ranger settling at her feet. The German shepherd, though trained as a patrol dog, seemed to understand the solemnity of the moment. His ears twitched, but he remained still, a silent sentinel. Douglas Trent rose first, his voice smooth, carrying an edge of rehearsed indignation. "Your Honor, this case is not about wealth or power, but about rightful guardianship. Mr. Whitfield, the biological father, seeks to reclaim his daughter from the custody of a man with no legal or blood relation to her. While we acknowledge Officer Hale's good intentions, we cannot ignore that the child has been removed from her father's care without consent. We submit evidence suggesting that the late Grace Whitfield was under extreme duress and mental strain when signing any alleged will." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Ethan felt Lily tense, her small hand gripping his arm. He kept his eyes forward, breathing slow. Sarah Hughes, who had accompanied them as witness and support, leaned forward from the row behind. Dressed in her police blues, her tall frame appeared even more striking in the courtroom light. She had chosen to testify because she could not bear injustice repeated, not after her brother's death. Years earlier had taught her how cruelty often hid behind polished words. Her sharp gaze never left Vanessa, whose smug smile made Sarah's jaw tighten. Judge Hanley turned her eyes toward Ethan. "Officer Hale, do you have counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied, rising. Beside him stood a woman in her late 40s, Claire Reynolds. Claire was a local attorney known for her steady presence in child advocacy cases. She was of medium height, with auburn hair streaked with silver and soft lines around her eyes from years of listening patiently to frightened families. Her voice carried a quiet strength when she spoke. "Your Honor, this is not a matter of good intentions, but of promises kept. Officer Hale has in his possession a legally binding will from Grace Whitfield, entrusting her daughter to his care in the event of her death. More than paper, he has demonstrated through actions his devotion to Lily's safety, love, and stability. We will present testimony and evidence proving not only the authenticity of this will, but also the unfitness of the environment Harold Whitfield and his wife would provide." The crowd stirred again. Vanessa stiffened, her painted lips pressing thin, while Harold avoided eye contact. The proceedings stretched across the morning. Witnesses were called. Nora, the retired school teacher, spoke of the nights she had cared for Lily when Harold and Vanessa cast her out. Her soft hazel eyes shone with indignation as she told of meals denied, of harsh words that sent the child running to her for comfort. "I may be old," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "but even I know love when I see it. That little girl never found it in that house, but she has now." Later, Sarah testified, her posture straight as a blade. She recounted the night she saw Lily at the wedding gate, cast out with nothing but a suitcase, while guests laughed at her tears. "A father who turns his back on his grieving daughter," Sarah said firmly, "is no father at all. But I've seen Officer Hale. He protects her as though she were his own flesh and blood. And his dog, Ranger, that animal would throw himself in front of a bullet before letting her come to harm. You don't see loyalty like that unless it's built on love." Lily was called last. She stepped hesitantly to the stand, her teddy bear clutched tightly. Judge Hanley leaned forward, her tone softer. "Do you understand why you're here, Lily?" The little girl nodded, her voice barely audible at first. Because they want me to go back. Do you want to? The judge asked gently. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. She shook her head quickly. They don't love me. They laughed when I cried. They told me I was a beggar. But Officer Hale, he stayed. And Ranger, he never leaves me. Please don't send me back. Her voice cracked, the plea raw and small, yet it cut through the silence of the room with more force than any lawyer's argument. Even some in the gallery wiped at their eyes. Harold looked down at his shoes, shame flickering across his face, though Vanessa's glare could have carved stone. Judge Hanley's gavel struck again, steadying the room. We will reconvene after recess. Evidence will be reviewed, testimonies weighed. This court will not allow manipulation or cruelty to decide the fate of a child. As the crowd filed out for recess, Ethan crouched beside Lily, brushing her hair gently back. You did brave today, he whispered. Ranger pressed close, tail brushing lightly against her legs as though to reassure her. Sarah stood near the door, arms crossed, keeping a watchful eye on Vanessa's sharp movements. And somewhere deep in his chest, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The storm was far from over, but light had broken through its clouds. When the courtroom reconvened after recess, the winter sun had dipped lower, its pale light slanting through tall windows like narrow blades of gold. The warmth outside was deceptive, for inside the chamber, the air hung heavy with tension. People shuffled back into wooden benches, reporters poised their pens, and the weight of countless eyes pressed on the small figure of Lily as she returned to sit beside Ethan. Ranger settled at her feet once more, ears alert, tail brushing the floor in measured, reassuring beats. Judge Hanley entered again, her robe sweeping across the polished floor. She had the kind of presence that demanded respect without effort, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, and steady-handed. She lifted her gavel, the sound cracking through the murmurs, bringing the room into silence. We will now hear closing arguments. Douglas Trent was the first to rise. His slicked-back hair caught the light as he adjusted his tie and strode confidently to the podium. His voice was like oiled metal, smooth, yet cold. Your Honor, we do not dispute the emotional testimony you've heard today, but sentiment is not law. The late Mrs. Whitfield, though no doubt a devoted mother, was gravely ill, under medication, and unable to make binding decisions. What stands before us is not about who can bake bread or soothe tears. It is about lawful guardianship. Harold Whitfield is the child's father, her blood. That cannot be erased by the sympathies of a grieving policeman, nor by a dog's loyalty. He glanced at Ranger with a faint smirk, his words dripping contempt. We cannot allow personal feelings to cloud rightful inheritance and parental authority. Vanessa leaned in her seat, lips curved with satisfaction, while Harold sat stiffly, though his eyes avoided the bench where Lily sat. Then Claire Reynolds rose. Her auburn hair framed a face etched with lines of both battle and kindness. She spoke without raising her voice, yet the stillness in the room leaned toward her words. Your Honor, law is not divorced from humanity. It is meant to protect, especially the most vulnerable. We have heard from witnesses who saw Lily cast out of her home, mocked and humiliated. We have heard from Lily herself, whose voice carried more honesty than any contract could. And yes, we have a will, signed, notarized, and clear, that entrusted this child to Officer Hale. But even if we strip that paper away, what remains? A man who chose to stay when her father turned his back. A home where love and safety are daily bred. A German shepherd, Ranger, who sits at her side even here, watchful, because loyalty and care are not things you can fabricate, they are earned. Her gaze swept toward Harold and Vanessa. Biological ties are not enough if they come with cruelty. The law must weigh what is in the best interest of the child, and all evidence points not to the Whitfield mansion, but to the modest home where Lily is finally allowed to be. A child again! A murmur rippled through the crowd. For the first time, Harold's rigid mask seemed to crack. His fingers twitched on the armrest, his eyes shifting toward his daughter. Lily, her teddy bear clasped tightly, would not look at him. Judge Hanley's gavel struck once more. I will deliver my ruling. She leaned forward, her voice measured, each word carrying the gravity of finality. After reviewing testimony, legal documents, and evidence, This court finds that the best interest of the child lies not in biology alone, but in the stability, care, and love she receives daily. Custody of Lily Whitfield is hereby granted to Officer Ethan Hale, effective immediately. The gallery erupted, gasps, whispers, even a few claps quickly silenced by the gavel. Lily's breath caught. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with disbelief, then threw her arms around him. Ranger pressed his head against her knee, tail thumping softly as though affirming the judgment himself. Vanessa shot to her feet, her elegant composure shattered. "This is an outrage!" she shrieked, her face flushed crimson, earrings swinging. "That child is ours. You can't take her away." Security officers, tall men in gray uniforms, moved quickly down the aisle, their firm presence a reminder that decorum was no longer optional. Harold sat frozen, his lips pale, shoulders slumping as though the weight of the verdict had crushed the last air from his lungs. He muttered something no one caught and buried his face in his hands. Among the observers was a new figure who had slipped in quietly during the recess, Mark Jensen, a journalist in his early 40s with sharp brown eyes, a lean build, and a face weathered by years of chasing truths the powerful wanted buried. His presence was not for spectacle, but for justice. He scribbled furiously in his worn notebook, already shaping tomorrow's headline, "Child Saved by Officer After Father's Betrayal." He had made his name exposing corruption in small towns, and he knew Pine Brook's story would resonate beyond its borders. Outside the courthouse, the air was brisk and clean, snowflakes tumbling lazily now instead of raging. Ethan led Lily down the steps, Ranger close, Sarah following a step behind, her eyes scanning the crowd. She felt relief too, though her disciplined face revealed little. Years ago, she had watched justice slip away for her brother. Today, she had helped tip the scales in the right direction, and something in her chest eased. Claire emerged last, her files tucked under her arm. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It isn't over," she warned gently. "The Whitfields may try appeals, but today, you won." Ethan nodded, his storm gray eyes softening as he looked down at Lily, who clung to his coat. "Today," he echoed, his voice rough but steady. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Ethan shielded Lily with his arm. Sarah, stepping in to push them back with firm words. Mark Jensen didn't shout. He simply raised his voice above the chaos. "Officer Hale, one question. What will you say to people who call this a miracle?" Ethan paused on the steps, the wind brushing his face, Ranger standing tall beside him. He thought of Grace's smile and photographs, of the will she had left behind, of Lily's trembling words in court, and of the way the German shepherd had never once left her side. His answer was simple. "Sometimes miracles look like choices. Today, I chose not to turn away." The words rippled through the gathered crowd, caught by pens, cameras, and whispers. For once, Pine Brook's story wasn't about power lost or gained. It was about love winning ground. And as Ethan lifted Lily into his arms, Ranger pacing close, the cold no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like the first clean breath after a storm. The weeks after the verdict reshaped Pine Brook in subtle but undeniable ways. Winter still pressed its cold hand across the hills, but for Ethan Hale, the weight he carried had shifted. Each morning, he woke not to loneliness, but to the sound of Lily's small feet on the wooden stairs, her laughter sometimes joined by Ranger's deep bark. The cabin, once too quiet, now thrummed with life. The German shepherd, nearly 6 years old with a thick coat dusted black and silver, had found a new role. Guardian not just of a policeman, but of a child who needed him. He followed Lily to the edge of the yard when she built clumsy snowmen, his breath fogging the air, amber eyes never straying far from her slight figure. Ethan watched from the porch, the weight of his badge in his pocket, but the heavier weight of fatherhood settling firmly in his chest. There were still moments of doubt. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he could truly fill the role Grace had left behind. But then Lily would crawl into his lap with a book, or Ranger would curl at their feet, as if affirming the bond with silent certainty. And the doubts quieted. Downtown, Harold and Vanessa faced the storm they had sown. Harold's company stocks plunged after headlines painted him as the father who abandoned his grieving child. He aged visibly in weeks, his once proud frame slouching as he shuffled between shareholder meetings and curt press conferences. His gray eyes, once sharp with ambition, now seemed hollow. Vanessa's elegance curdled into bitterness. Her beauty remained, but the town whispered about her cruelty. She had grown up in a house where wealth mattered more than warmth, and she clung to appearances with claws bared. But reputation is fragile, and hers cracked under the weight of scorn. Many who once sought her approval now crossed the street to avoid her. Melissa, their daughter, fared no better. At 12, she had inherited her mother's sharp tongue, but not her resilience. Children at school, once intimidated by her expensive dresses and haughty airs, now whispered "beggar princess" in mocking tones, turning her cruelty back upon her. She would cry in silence, though never in front of Vanessa, who only urged her to be stronger, harsher, colder. In truth, Melissa had learned too well from her mother what scorn looked like, but not what love felt like. At the Pinebrook precinct, Sarah Hughes leaned against her desk one evening, reviewing case reports. Tall and lean, with her sandy braid tucked neatly down her back, Sarah carried herself with the practiced calm of someone who had been hardened by loss. Her brother's death years ago still shadowed her, but she found quiet solace in knowing that helping Ethan and Lily had tipped the balance of her grief into something useful. She visited the cabin on weekends, sometimes with a box of old board games or a fresh scarf she'd knitted herself. Lily had taken to her quickly, looking up to the female officer with wide, trusting eyes. "Miss Sarah teaches me chess," Lily told Ethan one night proudly, though she could barely move the pieces without giggling. There were small joys in the weeks that followed. One Saturday, Nora invited them to her farmhouse for dinner. The retired teacher had aged, her back bent and hands weathered, but her hazel eyes were still quick with warmth. She served stew in heavy bowls, the aroma filling the old house as laughter wove between them. Ethan watched Lily at the table, cheeks flushed with health, smiling as Ranger rested his chin on her knee under the tablecloth. He realized then that these simple evenings were what Grace must have dreamed for her daughter. Still, shadows lingered. Ethan knew Harold and Vanessa might attempt appeals, but their influence waned as the public saw them for what they were. Mark Jensen, the journalist, published a searing piece that spread far beyond Pinebrook. The policeman who chose love over law. A town's reckoning with family and power. Mark was a lean man with restless energy, often scribbling notes in the corner of a diner or pacing the courthouse steps. He had chased corruption for decades, his face lined by long hours, yet he carried a spark of relentless hope. His article painted Ethan not as a hero, but as a man who simply did not turn away. "Perhaps," he wrote, "that is the bravest act of all." One late afternoon, Ethan took Lily and Ranger to the cemetery on the edge of town. The air was cold, the ground blanketed in snow, but the grave of Grace Whitfield was clear, brushed clean by someone's hand. Ethan knelt with Lily, who laid her teddy bear beside the headstone again, her blonde hair catching the pale winter sun. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm not scared anymore. Daddy, Ethan, and Ranger take care of me. I'm happy." Her words trembled, but they carried a strength Ethan had not heard before. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his storm-gray eyes glistening. "We'll never let you be alone again." Ranger stood guard a few paces behind, ears forward, tail brushing gently. He did not understand words, but he knew devotion. His place was here, with them. As weeks turned into months, Pinebrook began to forget the scandal in favor of new gossip, new headlines. But in the cabin on the hill, a family was forming not by blood, but by choice. Ethan rose earlier, packing Lily's lunch before school. Sarah dropped by to check the locks and join them for cocoa. Nora stopped in with loaves of bread. And in the evenings, when the fire glowed and Ranger stretched across the hearth, Lily would draw with her pencils, houses with wide windows, trees heavy with blossoms, a tall man, a little girl, and a German shepherd always at their side. Ethan pinned one drawing above his desk. It was clumsy, the lines crooked, but it said more than a court ruling ever could. Family was no longer a fragile hope, but a living truth. One evening, as twilight bathed the cabin in lavender light, Lily looked up at Ethan with sleepy eyes. "Will you always stay?" she whispered. Ethan lifted her into his arms, Ranger pressing close. His voice, rough from years of command, softened. Always. That's a promise I won't break. The snow outside kept falling, silent and steady. But inside the cabin, warmth gathered and held. For the first time, Ethan knew the storms of Pine Brook had given way to something enduring, a home of their own. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest winters of life, God can send a miracle through the most unexpected hands. A loyal German shepherd, a devoted officer, and the courage of a child became proof that His love works quietly in our everyday struggles. Sometimes we pray for light, and God answers by sending people who refuse to turn away. In your own life, remember that no act of kindness is too small to carry His blessing forward.